The heart of the DC swamp is the unholy alliance between big business and big government. The corruption in our capital is blatant and systemic. Powerful industries literally buy the outcomes they want from Congress and the federal government through campaign contributions and lobbying. By that standard, it doesn't get much swampier than big oil. In 2016, oil and gas special interests spent $119 million lobbying the federal government and another $104 million in donations. That's nearly $250 million buying influence in 1 year. The same year, the industry benefited from $5.2 billion worth of tax breaks from President Obama's government. What a coincidence. Big oil is this week's Swamp Watch. The American Petroleum Institute is a trade association representing the interests of the oil and gas industry. It was founded during World War I when the federal government and domestic oil companies worked together to help the war effort. Today, the API represents more than 600 of the nation's largest energy companies, including ExxonMobil, Chevron and BP America. Many of those companies donate millions of dollars to the API to help fund a massive lobbying effort. Since 2013, for example, just this one organization has spent more than $40 million lobbying Congress alone. And it's not just lobbying. There's campaign cash, too. API donated over $2 million to candidates and parties in 2016, slightly more than ExxonMobil itself. Of course, the swampiness goes beyond money. Its connections, too. The revolving door between the API and the federal government is unbelievable. Or rather, to regular viewers of Swamp Watch, exactly what you'd expect. In 2016, out of 40 lobbyists for the American Petroleum Institute, 25 had previously held government jobs. So, what does big oil get in exchange? Well, for starters, they get their very own federal body. They literally buy a piece of our government. The National Petroleum Council, now under the Department of Energy, is a federally chartered and privately funded advisory committee established in 1946. According to its website, the Council's purpose is, quote, to advise, inform and make recommendations to the Secretary of Energy with respect to any matter relating to oil and natural gas. Isn't that nice? If only the rest of us had such privileged access to the corridors of power. Oh, wait, the rest of us don't have $100 million a year to shovel into the pockets of politicians. Unsurprisingly, this swampy Petroleum Council turns out to be a front for yet more industry lobbying. In 2015, the NPC spent $325,000 on a contract with FTI Consulting. That's the same firm paid by the American Petroleum Institute to lobby for them. Nice work if you can get it. Why exactly the National Petroleum Council needs to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on swanky lobbying firms is a bit of a mystery, though, when they generally cut out the middleman and put big oil's big guns straight into the government. Until February last year, its chairman was none other than current Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, former CEO of ExxonMobil. Dick Cheney was chairman before becoming vice president. He was the CEO of oil and gas giant Halliburton. The council's last meeting was in September, and the speakers included Energy Secretary Rick Perry, previously on the board of two oil companies, Sunoco and Energy Transfer Partners, and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, fresh from the board of oil pipeline company QS Energy. I mean, why don't they just be open about it and move the federal government to Houston or something? That would certainly make life easier for Byron Brown. Who's that, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. He was senior counsel to the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, and then last year was appointed to a team at the Environmental Protection Agency reviewing regulations affecting oil and gas companies. Helpfully, his wife is a senior lobbyist for a major oil and gas company, Hess Corporation. How perfectly swampy. Speaking of that Senate Committee, Environment and Public Works, Senator John Barrasso became its chairman last year. In the 2016 election cycle, before Barrasso became chairman, he wasn't even in the top 20 of senators who received contributions from oil and gas. But since he's become chairman, with significant power over the industry, surprise, surprise, he's jumped to the top of the list, receiving more donations from oil and gas than any other senator. Nearly $250,000 just in a few months. Is there any clearer example of the total, blatant, shameful corruption that goes on in Washington? Look, I've got nothing against the oil and gas industry, just as I had nothing against the ethanol industry when we looked at that a few weeks ago. I'm all for boosting our energy industries and making America energy independent. But since we have a president who believes in that and a Republican Congress that believes in that, why the hell does the industry have to go in for all this sleazy lobbying and insider dealing? The working Americans who put President Trump in the White House voted to end the corruption in Washington and demand that all our industries compete on a level playing field, not a murky swamp.